So I think Joe asked for the title of the talk. The title would just be Foresight and Blameless Ignorance. So before I get into what I'm really trying to do with this, this talk, I'm going to give an intro to the tracing strategy as it deals with cases of ignorance. I also want to say what I'm presenting today is was sort of an afterthought to a longer paper in which I make maybe a more substantive argument. And I'm just interested in seeing if I can develop this thought a little bit further. So I'd be really grateful to get feedback on it. Okay. So ignorance is often taken to constitute an excuse for morally wrong behavior and its bad consequences. However, there are cases in which an agent lacks awareness with respect to the moral status of an action or even the non-moral features of the action that are morally relevant. And yet the agent is still blameworthy for it. In these sorts of cases, we might attempt to explain the agent's blameworthiness for that thing by tracing it back to the agent's blameworthiness for some prior item that it resulted from. This sort of tracing strategy, as it's come to be called, helps explain how an agent can be blameworthy for some item that is an action, an omission, an act consequence, even though he or she lacks awareness of its moral status or of some relevant non-moral feature. So this is a really common case people offer in the tracing literature, but I'm going to offer it anyway because it's useful to start off with. So I just call the case allergy. Dr. Adams gives Jeremy a certain type of medicine for Jeremy's ailment, unaware that Jeremy is fatally allergic to one of the chemicals in the medicine. Beforehand, however, Adams' nurse asked him if he wanted to look over Jeremy's medical records, which include information about Jeremy's allergy. Adams chose not to look at Jeremy's medical records, aware that medical records often include this sort of information. So Jeremy gets sick as a result of being given medicine that he's allergic to. So in this case, Dr. Adams gives Jeremy medicine that he's allergic to, but at the time that he gives Jeremy the medicine, he's ignorant of the fact that it's going to have these consequences. And how does the tracing strategy apply in this case? Well, we can say that Dr. Adams is blameworthy for his action and its consequences, despite his ignorance, in part because he's blameworthy for something that led to it, namely his earlier conscious choice to ignore Jeremy's medical records. So in this way, in order for the tracing strategy to work, that is, in order to be derivatively blameworthy for something, it needs to be the result of some prior item. However, not just anything that a blameworthy action or omission leads to is something for which the agent is thereby also blameworthy. It must also be that at some time in the past, it was foreseeable for the agent that the action or the omission in question for which he is blameworthy would or might result in a subsequent thing. I said foreseeable. Some theorists, like Michael Zimmerman, for example, require that it actually be foreseen. I'll get into that a little bit later. And so to motivate this sort of foresight or foreseeability condition, here's a case from Holly Smith that she uses. I call it blood. The daughter of a business executive has been assigned to a science project of investigating the distribution of blood types within the population. To assist her, the executive asks his secretary to survey the office staff and to prepare a report on their blood types by noon. Instead of carrying out this project like the secretary is told, the secretary reads a spy novel instead. At 11:45, a coworker suffers a massive bleeding as a result of some freak office accident. Paramedics arrive and could start a blood transfusion immediately if they knew the worker's blood type, but of course, they don't know the worker's blood type. The person is unconscious, and so that the coworker can't provide the information of what blood type they are. And so the person dies before the transfusion can be done. Had the secretary followed the boss's orders, right, to prepare a report of the blood types by noon, they would have known the coworker's blood type, and the person would have been saved. So although the secretary may be blameworthy for the failure to follow the boss's orders, it would be unreasonable for anyone to blame her for the death of the worker. After all, who could have foreseen this, right? It's a freak office accident. And so, in contrast, in the earlier case with Dr. Adams was aware, right, when he decided not to check the medical chart, that it might have these bad consequences, that he might overlook or fail to see that this person has allergies, and that it might result in him giving someone medicine that they're allergic to. So this case, this blood case, is supposed to show that there's a second condition on tracing. It's not just that the subsequent item needs to be the causal result of some earlier item. It also needs to be the case that there's some sort of foresight or foreseeability connection between the two. We talked about this yesterday with Rosen's paper. The tracing strategy helps highlight a really useful distinction. Let's say that an agent's blameworthiness for something is direct when he is blameworthy for it in virtue of the control that he exercises and the awareness that he has at that time. In contrast, an agent's blameworthiness for something is derivative when he is blameworthy for it at least partly in virtue of his blameworthiness for some prior thing. And so as I understand it, the tracing strategy entails the following. If an agent lacks the control or awareness required to be directly blameworthy for something morally wrong or bad, then the agent is blameworthy for this thing if and only if this thing is, one, in part the result of some prior thing for which the person is blameworthy, and two, this agent satisfies a relevant foresight condition with respect to the consequence. So the conceptual space leaves room for roughly speaking, two general positions concerning this latter foresight condition. One view is that the agent at the prior time need to actually foresee that something will or might result, that the consequence that does result will or might result from the earlier thing. So let's just call the earlier thing X and the later thing Y, just to be simple. The second view is that it must be foreseeable for the agent at the time of X that it would or might result in Y. So just to clarify the tracing strategy and these foresight conditions a little bit, in response to Manuel Vargas's paper, The Trouble with Tracing, John and Neil Tognazzini have a paper called The Truth About Tracing, in which they argue that tracing doesn't require that the particular consequences that result from the actions be foreseeable by the agent at the time of the action. Rather, what must be foreseeable is that the agent for the agent is that the action will or might result in a type of consequence of which the actual consequence is an instance. It's important to point out that this same move can be applied to an actual foresight view. So John and Neil have a foreseeability view. If you were to hold a foresight view, you could take this on board and say, well, look, the agent must actually foresee that this one item X will or might result in Y, in a type of consequence of which Y is an instance. Okay, so in a longer version of what I'm presenting right now, I argue that an actual foresight requirement is preferable to the foreseeability requirement on tracing, given the purpose and the nature of the tracing strategy. The main idea behind the argument is that foreseeability views don't provide sufficient grounding for derivative blameworthiness. I think that this cognitive requirement, this foresight requirement, needs to be stronger than the foreseeability views provide. I'm not looking to defend that right now. It would take a little while. But when considering foreseeability views, it's important to note that it's possible for some consequence to be foreseeable for an agent without the agent's actually foreseeing it, and also where the agent is blameless for his or her failure to foresee it. So foreseeability views have the implication that a person can be blameworthy for something that is the result of his or her blameless ignorance. This implication of foreseeability views is in tension with a principle offered by Gideon Rosen, one of the principles that we looked at yesterday. My aim here is to make perspicuous that tension. First, though, I just want to point out that Rosen himself is committed to a foreseeability view. So what he says in an earlier paper, Culpability and Ignorance, he says, when I'm passive with respect to an occurrence, when it merely happens in me or to me or around me, then I am responsible for the occurrence only if it is the foreseeable upshot of prior culpable activity on my part. So Rosen's claim about foreseeability there is not a sufficiency claim, it's a necessity claim, right? But the foreseeability views hold that an agent is blameworthy for something if, and not just only if and only if, it is the foreseeable upshot of some prior culpable activity on their part, on the agent's part. So to be able to stick Rosen with the foreseeability view, we need to know that he holds that foreseeability is not just a necessary, but also a sufficient condition on being derivatively blameworthy in conjunction with the other conditions. Rosen says, but we are not culpable in every case for the bad consequences of our culpable wrongdoing. It would be more accurate to say, as the law sometimes does, that we are on the hook for the foreseeable bad consequences of the wrong we do. So in this claim, the sufficiency claim, is involved. So Rosen is committed to the view that an agent is derivatively blameworthy for something if and only if it is a foreseeable result of the agent's prior blameworthy or culpable action. Okay, so this view implies that an agent is blameworthy for some bad act consequence, even if it's the result of blameless ignorance on his part. But this implication doesn't sit well with another one of Rosen's views. Rosen is committed to the following principle. This is where I should probably use a board, I guess. Which one should I use? I'll use this.
My flowers.
Sorry. I guess they've already been trampled over so many times at this point. So I'm just gonna call this principle BI. An agent is blameworthy for A-ing, where A is some action, A-ing from ignorance only if the agent is blameworthy for the ignorance from which he acts, or from which he A's. Okay, so I mean, Rosen actually holds this view with respect to both moral and non-moral ignorance. I don't think what I'm saying today needs to hang on either reading. That it can be read as either or both. And also, I use the term blameworthy. Rosen uses the term culpable. The way that he uses them seems to imply that he uses them interchangeably for the most part. As Matt and I talked yesterday, the culpability part might, what he means by culpability might mean something a little bit different. Yeah. I'm not sure here if that's going to make any difference for Rosen, but we can see.
He says he means to use them interchangeably.
He does. But as we said, culpability might be something a little more like blameworthiness for the acquisition of something, or, yeah. Okay. So I call this principle BI for blameless ignorance. Rosen phrases this principle in terms of acts, not act consequences. Nevertheless, there is some tension between foreseeability views of the tracing strategy and this principle. Where's the tension? As I've already pointed out, foreseeability views have the implication that an agent can be blameworthy for some bad act consequence, even if it's the result of blameless ignorance on their part. There's certainly some tension between this implication and the motivation behind this principle, blameless ignorance, this BI principle. However, this implication of the foreseeability view, that is, that it's possible that an agent be blameworthy for something that's the result of blameless ignorance, for a consequence that's a result of blameless ignorance. It doesn't directly contradict that view, but it does contradict a view similar to BI, and I'll call this principle BIC. This might take a little bit more. So, the person or agent is blameworthy for something C that is, so this might not fit, or else, yeah, that is a consequence of A-ing from ignorance and this ignorance is ignorance with respect to which with respect to whether C would, wow, this is getting rough, would result from A, so it's not just any old ignorance, only if X is blameworthy for this ignorance. Okay.
Just read it.
Sure, yeah. Sorry, it's a little bit messy. So BIC says, a person is blameworthy for something C that is a consequence of A-ing from ignorance with respect, and the ignorance in question is ignorance with respect to whether C would result from A. Only if X, this is a person, so a person X, only if X is blameworthy for this ignorance, that is blameworthy for being ignorant with respect to whether C would result from A. Okay. So although the implication of foreseeability views that a person can be blameworthy for a consequence that is a result of, for an act consequence that is a result of blameless ignorance, although that doesn't contradict BI, it does contradict BIC. And if BIC is true, and if it's true that it's possible for an agent to be blameless for failing to foresee what is foreseeable for him or her, then foreseeability views are false. So here's the crux then. The crux is it's difficult to see any reason for accepting the BI claim, but not BIC. And the upshot is that those committed to the BI claim have reason to reject foreseeability views. So I'll say a couple things really briefly. One, this is most obviously a problem for Rosen. Rosen phrases his foreseeability condition in terms of blameworthiness. It's not obviously a problem for John and Neil. One, because they actually phrase their foreseeability condition in terms of responsibility, and as John holds, you can be morally responsible for something that's bad or wrong without being blameworthy for it. But I'm also not sure whether or not John or Neil accept BI. So the thing is, if you're a foreseeability theorist, and if you accept BI, then it's hard to see what reason you might have for accepting BI but not BIC. And if you accept BIC, then you have to give up the foreseeability views. And yeah, that's it.
But you probably said this, but could you say it again? Why is it that if you accept BIC, you have to give up foreseeability?
Okay, yeah, that's great. So foreseeability views require that. So here's a sufficient condition on derivative blameworthiness from a foreseeability view. An agent is blameworthy for derivatively blameworthy for Y if it's the result of something X for which they're blameworthy, and which at the time of X it was foreseeable for that agent that Y would or might result. Right. And so I point out in the paper that it's possible for something to be foreseeable for an agent without them foreseeing it. It's also possible for an agent to be blameless for failing to foresee what was foreseeable for them. If that's true, then that would contradict BIC, because BIC requires that you can only be blameworthy for the consequence of an action that's done from ignorance, if you're blameworthy for that ignorance. And so, I mean, so, you know, this was more of an afterthought on the paper I was working on. So I don't want to say this is like some knockdown argument, or it's so obvious that if you accept BI, you have to accept BIC. So this is where you all come in. I'm not clear, so when I say it's hard to see a reason, I'm not saying there's no reason. I'm kind of asking, do you see a reason why you might, in principle, accept the blameless ignorance principle, but not the blameless ignorance C principle? If there's not a reason, then for example, Rosen in particular holds two views which are at least implicitly contradictory.
There's a sense in which, so the last bit of BIC, only if X is blameworthy for this ignorance, there's a sense in which I could accept that given my view, a sense of blame. Like I could say, well, I am blaming you for that ignorance. That ignorance is bad in you. Yeah, that's not what you mean by blameworthy for. But this gets back to the culpability. This is a causal notion for you, and it's going to involve alternatives probably.
I don't want, so maybe you could show me if I have to. I don't want to have to commit myself to this specific culpability reading of either of these. So yeah, on my view, I think you do hold BI. You just don't hold a really close principle, something like CI, where we just replace blameworthiness with culpability or something like that. Where it has that difference that we discussed yesterday.
Yeah, I think that's right. So your question was, do we see a reason for the BIs should lead to BIC?
So
or
it just seems like the motivation you might have behind accepting BI seems to be the same sort of motivation you'd have behind why you would accept BIC. So if there's some relevant difference between why you'd accept BI but not BIC, well then maybe there's a way Rosen can get out of this, and anyone else who's a foreseeability theorist and holds to BI can get out of this. So it's supposed to be a trap of sorts, right? If you're a foreseeability theorist and you accept the BI principle, then it seems like unless you can offer a principled reason for why you would accept BI but not BIC, then it just seems like you're in trouble. Yeah, Ben.
Can I ask, with the relative blameworthiness, why is it, and I've got maybe a case to question this, why is it that you have to be blameworthy for the, so you're blameworthy for something at T2 and your blameworthiness derives from some act at T1 that you're also blameworthy for? Why is it that you have to be blameworthy for the act at T1? So I'm thinking of like cases where like you're actually praiseworthy for an act, but you could foresee that you'd be then blameworthy in the future. So for example, I don't know if this case works, but you get a job at a charity, seems pretty praiseworthy, but you also know about yourself that this job, you might work too hard and become a terrible person as a result of doing this, working at this charity. You work really hard, maybe you'll neglect your children, something like that. You maybe perform some acts for which you'd be derivatively blameworthy for. I'm just wondering, is there a problem with the case, or maybe I misunderstood something?
Yeah. No, I've asked myself this question 3 or 4 times in the middle of writing this project, and I think I come back to the same answer each time, but I keep on forgetting the answer. But I think I have it now. I think the answer is that if the action, if the earlier action, so we'll just call it X and Y, where X is the earlier action that results in Y. If you're blameworthy for, let me put it this way, if you're praiseworthy for X, it seems like X can't be something that's morally wrong. It has to be something that's morally justified. But if something's being morally permissible or justified or even obligatory, depends at least in part on the consequences, then it seems like, well, if you're justified in performing that action, you can't be blameworthy for the consequences, because the consequences would have to be so bad such that they would make it that the action wasn't permissible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. I suppose, or maybe I'm thinking of cases where it's not like it's guaranteed. So in the case of the joining charity, it's not guaranteed that it might have to depend on some environmental factors that you can foresee, but it's not that they won't definitely happen. But it just so happens everything goes wrong. I mean, I don't know how to sort of break things down, but it still seems like you could still say that the act is praiseworthy rather than blameworthy. I'm not sure if it's like really a problem for what you're saying, because you could just phrase it in terms of responsibility instead. I don't know if you need to phrase it in terms of blameworthiness. Maybe you've got another reason, another motivation for that, but...
Yeah, I don't know if I have a very particular reason for phrasing in terms of blameworthiness. A couple of the reasons, maybe one, because I think talk of moral responsibility it becomes terribly difficult after a while, because no one knows what anyone's talking about. It's not that bad. It just seems like it happens so often that people talk past each other. It seems like that happens often, even with blameworthiness, but less often.
That's right.
So I'm trying to sort of, this is what I care about. It's blameworthiness, and if that's what you mean by moral responsibility, well then I guess I don't worry about moral responsibility. And also further, Rosen's concerned with blameworthiness, and this criticism sticks on his view more clearly than any other view.
Yeah, that's what I guess.
Okay, I do kind of feel the force of it, but I do want to resist it. Joe?
I mean, so I've got a type of case, but I don't want to sidetrack the discussion. So if you think it's not helpful, just say so, and then we can move. But so you have these sort of it's sort of like a devil dilemma, where you're offered something like, if you sell your soul to the devil, but you can save 3 others, and you do so, you might be doing something praiseworthy at the moment, but that leads to disastrous consequences for yourself, at least, maybe for others, something like that. I mean, so you might just say that like those sorts of dilemma, like you're offered something. I'm just trying to think of some sort of case like that, where we're offered something really good, but it comes with a personal cost, and maybe that personal cost ends up actually being quite large. So I mean, similar, I guess.
I think if you were justified in performing the action that incurred the cost to begin with, then you couldn't be blameworthy for the cost. By stipulation, you'd be justified even given the cost. This is a similar sort. I think you're pushing in the same place that Ben was, and I think maybe that's my response.
Okay, no, that seems fine. And then what if you, I'm trying to think like of reasons that BI and BIC might come apart. So I don't know whether maybe somebody's really anti-consequentialist in terms of their thinking, or maybe they're really pro-consequentialist in terms of their thinking, but they think consequences sort of blameworthy for an action versus blameworthiness of the consequence of that action for some reason really come apart, or maybe there's so much luck involved in the consequences that you really think that they're separate, something like that. Or I don't know if that would reinforce your point, or I need to think about it more, but it seems like maybe you think luck is really important, or maybe you think luck isn't important at all. That might be some wedge you could try to draw between them.
Yeah, I think the luck, the concern with luck makes tracing extremely. You start to see how extremely difficult it would be to come up with a really well thought out view of the tracing strategy. How when you say, is it reasonably foreseeable for you that Y will result from X? Well, I mean, subjectively speaking, how probable is Y is resulting from X? Is it like 1 in 100? Is it 1 in 1,000? Suppose you for some strange reason that there's definitely a non-zero chance, and you have a reason for thinking that. You also have a reason for thinking that the non-zero chance is super small. So something like winning the lottery, but something terrible, right? Where you think, wow, like I have reason to think something might happen, but I also have reason to think that the chances are super small. And if it happens, I just don't know what to say about that. I mean, those sorts of cases, maybe I just take this mitigating blameworthiness line, but maybe that's just an easy way to get out of difficult cases. It seems like it, but it might be a good way too.
Yeah, I mean, in a moral lottery case, I mean, just some of the cases we were talking about yesterday during lunch, it's just sort of, once it's so low, like once your expected odds of something going so disastrously wrong reaches sort of minimal point, then yeah, maybe you can be justified in those cases even for the.
So yeah, you might need involved in almost every specification of a foresight or foreseeability condition. Almost no one says it must be the case that it was foreseeable for the agent that this will happen. Right. And they always say will or might. And what's involved in the might part? I take it's supposed to be something like there's some non-specified, vague, but non-negligible chance. Right. And maybe that's just a way of, sort of smoothing over that without getting into it. And it might just, I'm not sure how to get into it other than saying that.
Sometimes I say might well happen, because it seems like will is too strong and might is too weak, so it's somewhere in between the right requirement, but yeah, how to specify it, hard. What if, okay, here's a question, and so your argument is if you accept BI, you should accept BIC, and if you accept BIC, then you'd have to give up the foreseeability. What if you adjusted the foreseeability criterion to say, well, it must be, so the agent's responsible or blameworthy, if and only if he does something, let's say something that's blameworthy and it results in something else later. And now you have two conditions. He could foresee that something else would or might well happen, and if he fails actually to foresee it, he didn't fail culpably. I mean, what if because that was the problem that you said. The problem is there might be cases where you fail, but your culpability your failure is not culpable. So what if you just built that in? Is it problematic because it introduces circularity? Or, if you're trying to reduce the notion, if you're trying to give an account which doesn't employ the notion of responsibility on the right side of the biconditional, maybe you think this is a problem, but anyway. Yeah,
no, it's a good question. I have thought about that, and that's another one that either I can't come up with an answer or I keep on forgetting what my answer to that question is. So let's see, you said consider the condition where, so if you revise a foreseeability view to say, it must have been foreseeable for an agent at the time of X that Y would or might result from X, and if X is, let's see, and X is blameworthy only if X is.
No, just the conjunct then is if the agent fails to foresee Y, his failure is not culpable.
Mm-hmm. His failure to foresee why his failure is non-culpable. Yeah, I'm worried. Well, actually, no. I think that might work. That is something I think I need to think about more.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to jump to say anything now.
No, that's good. That might be
I worry that it might be that and this is what I can't make a connection to right now without thinking about it more. But I worry that it might end up collapsing into a foresight condition.
Okay.
But I don't. You might just be right. You might be that it just needs to be revised.
Problematically circular, I'm not sure, because it refers to culpability. Anyway,
Is the blood, sorry.
no, that was it.
The blood case, the Holly Smith blood case, is that in that older paper?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. She has a newer paper, like in social. Like in,
Yeah, is that the one? The non-tracing cases
Yeah,
of
non-tracing
couple. Yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't read it, but
Yeah.
non-tracing
yeah.
cases.
It's an interesting paper. Yeah, I think you would like it probably.
Yeah.
What is it? Tell us more about that new place. It's non-tracing case?
It's called culpability. I think in non-tracing cases of
Negligence.
yeah, I have it somewhere,
It's
but
in social theory and practice, right?
yeah,
Fairly recently.
A couple years.
yeah. It's pretty recent. I don't know where I put it on my computer, but I had it. It's a pretty long paper, actually.
Okay, that'd be interesting. She was, for many years, an administrator at Rutgers, and so maybe now that she's finally stepped down from administrating, maybe now she can write again.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
So, can you say what you think the problem is with John's reply to Vargas?
Oh, there's no problem. He's right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you.
Oh no. So when I say he and Neil are just right.
The only person beside my mother who could say that.
Yeah. Yeah, they think that. So Vargas, offers a series of cases. The strongest case is supposed to be the Jeff the Jerk case, where Jeff is told to lay off some employees, but he does so in a really inconsiderate way. So you want to be able to say that Jeff is blameworthy for doing that in such an inconsiderate way. And then Vargas says, well, look, let's fill in the details and see how everything's going to work on this case. And it turns out that Jeff's becoming an inconsiderate jerk as a result, ultimately, of choices he made in high school, maybe to be cooler or do things that he thought would make himself be cooler. He had no idea at the time. It wasn't even reasonably foreseeable for him at the time that this would somewhere down the line result in his inconsiderately laying off these employees on this day. And as John and Neil so reasonably reply, they say, well, look, no one ever thought tracing required that you have foresight or foreseeability of the particular consequence. It's something more like a consequence of a particular type. And so, yes, it's much more likely that, given the other maybe stipulations about the case, we need to know more details. That did Jeff have a good idea at the earlier time that his taking on this process of character transformation, whether it would or might result in him acting inconsiderately or in a jerky way to other people, yeah, it's much more reasonable that he satisfies that. And so they say, well, look, we could just sort of more appropriately alter the scope of what must be foreseeable. And so my point was just the foresight theorists can take this on too. They take on this move and just say, look, even if you think actual foresight is required, you don't need to say that actual foresight of the particular consequence is required. You might just say actual foresight that the agent was aware at the time that X might result in might result in Y, or a type of consequence of which Y is an instance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I just want to take that on and then move on and then argue against foreseeability views.
And there are, I would say, just for people's information, Neil Tognazzini and I revised the paper a bit. So, okay, Manuel Vargas published The Troubles with Tracing, I guess it was in News or PPR. It was either News or PPR, I think. And then we published a reply called The Truth About Tracing. But then we revised it a bit, and it's reprinted in my book, Deep Control, under the title The Triumph of Tracing now. We keep upping. Yeah, we revised it too, because we thought there were some problems, some different. But yeah, it seems like it's unreasonable to require someone to anticipate the specific consequence, but some consequence of some type, but then that introduces a looseness that caused problems, so we try and revise it a bit more. Yeah. Also, it just seemed implausible that, as Manuel Vargas told the story, Jeff, you know, when he's an adolescent, thinks, oh, he's not really cool enough and not attractive enough to members of the opposite sex, so he starts working out regularly. He goes to the gym and he works out very, very much, but he doesn't anticipate that this will lead him, he'll get now into this culture of jerkiness, and this will cause him to become a jerk. So we also pointed out that it's pretty implausible that as you're doing these workouts and stuff, you couldn't notice that this was leading to this and then adjust your behavior. And it's just implausible that working out every day will cause you to be a jerk. Now, I remember Yishai says he tries to work out 5 days a week. Yishai, you're a very, very sweet person. You're not like, I think you're a counterexample to Manuel Vargas's claim.
Also, something that you might say to Vargas in that case is, depending on how you spell the details of the case, you might just wonder whether or not Jeff is directly blameworthy for those actions. If it's that opaque to him that this will, you know, have these sorts of results, you might think.
That's what we say. It's a dilemma. And if it really is completely opaque to him that going to the gym regularly will lead to becoming this insensitive person, then he's not responsible. But what's plausible is it is something that he can anticipate under some description.
That's a really weird example. I mean, certainly he's got to start to actively partake in some kind of jerk culture. It's not like the mere working out somehow affects his brain in a jerky direction.
Yeah, you have to, I think that it's a very under-described example.
So when you said directly responsible, I was assuming you didn't mean what John meant.
Oh, so when I say someone's directly, well, I'll use blameworthy, but directly blameworthy.
Just for his jerky behavior.
What I was saying is the earlier choices that led to it, if at the time of those earlier choices, it was so opaque to Jeff that these choices might have these bad consequences. If it's just choices like, I'll work out in the gym, you know, then it's not clear whether he's even blameworthy for those choices. And so if that's not the case, then tracing doesn't even get off, the question of whether or not he's blameworthy for the other things might not even get off the ground. Or else, right, if he is blameworthy for those earlier choices, then you make John and Neil's move and say, well, he probably could have seen that. You know, if he's blameworthy for those choices, he's probably blameworthy at least in part of the knowledge of what sorts of consequences they might have. And then you just get, you know, on a plausible reading of the tracing strategy, you can account for his blameworthiness at a later time. I think I'm over time, but
All right, well, thank you.